Because whether the situation happened or not, we still learned a valuable lesson from this legend. The Bay of Pigs time zone confusion. The Bay of Pigs invasion was a failed military operation by the USA on Cuba during a time when Fidel Castro was gaining a lot of power within Cuba and getting really friendly with the Soviet Union, and America did not like it whatsoever. The US president at the time, John F. Kennedy, decided that his best course of action was to secretly try to overthrow Fidel Castro, but in a way that left him some plausible deniability. And that alone is kind of a mistake on his part, because him being half in, half out definitely was a major contributing factor in the Bay of Pigs invasion failing, but it's not what I want to focus on this point, because I think there's an even smaller and even more hilarious mistake that took place during this already failed operation. There's a lot of nuance to the situation, but for a bit of additional context, when John F. Kennedy was running for president, he was running on a very anti-communist sentiment. And after he got into power, when there was a neighbor south of the American border who was very communist, he had to do something about it. But there was an issue. Cuba was getting close with the Soviet Union, and this was during the Cold War, so Kennedy did not want to rub the Soviet Union the wrong way. But at the same time, if Kennedy did nothing about Cuba just becoming this communist society, he was going to look passive to the people that voted for him to help eliminate communism, which is why he decided to be a bit sneaky. And by sneaky, I mean he literally assembled an army specifically of Cuban refugees in America. And he even went as far as painting an American B-26 bomber to look like it was Cuban, so that when it was bombing Cuba, it wouldn't look like America was involved whatsoever. Although the bomber was almost instantly known to be American as soon as it was seen flying over Cuba, which is kind of what exposed the entire situation, but we'll get into that. The ultimate goal from the American perspective was to simply invade the Bay of Pigs, build a small base in that area, and through the successful landing of troops in the Bay of Pigs, through the power of that army and through the power of locals now feeling emboldened to rise up against this communist government, they would easily be able to overthrow the government, kill Castro, and have a new capitalistic society installed in Cuba once again. But there was a few problems. One, the American forces, more specifically Cuban refugees fighting on America's behalf, did not have proper support for reasons we'll get into. And also, the government actually underestimated how popular Fidel Castro actually was. The invasion started with a bombing raid from American planes on Cuban soil, and then the following day, troops were on the ground in the Bay of Pigs. However, at this time, the plan was relatively exposed due to that plane being poorly disguised and seen early. And because John F. Kennedy didn't want to catch the blame for having this entire invasion, he almost instantly withdrew all air support that was deemed crucial to the mission, basically leaving the troops that he had just sent there to die. He withdrew the support to have plausible deniability that, oh, I didn't want that going on, but in reality, that's exactly what he wanted, and all he did was just ensure the failure of that invasion. And due to the lack of support, the invasion only lasted 3 days, and the Cuban forces from America were either killed or surrendered. Now, this is where time zones actually come into play, because during this situation, as a last-ditch effort, a bombing plane was actually sent from Nicaragua to help provide support. However, Nicaragua is in a different time zone than Cuba, but the bomber jet pilots did not take this into consideration. So when there was plans for the bomber jet pilot to be accompanied by fighter jets over Cuba, there was an hour difference between their plans, meaning in this last-ditch effort, this bomber plane was unescorted by fighter jets, leaving it extremely vulnerable, cutting that plan short too when the time actually came. And this sort of last-ditch effort failure was the nail in the coffin. And the backlash because of this failed Bay of Pigs invasion was the following. One, Fidel Castro only grew stronger as a leader because in the eyes of the Cuban citizens, he had just defended the country from an attack from the American government, the biggest military machine in the world, making him look like an extremely strong and powerful leader. And besides making the citizens favor Fidel even more, this made Fidel favor the Soviet Union even more, which is why this situation was basically the catalyst for the Cuban Missile Crisis, which only happened a year later. So yeah, although there was military fighter pilots that were not able to remember time zones between Nicaragua and Cuba, leaving a bomber plane completely vulnerable, that's more or less of an oversight in this entire operation that was ultimately a huge failure for the American government. And this definitely had very serious historical repercussions.